I wrote The Science of Racism in about 9 months, and that's really quick. That's very quick for a book of its kind. It's not because I'm a particularly good or quick writer. I don't think so. I think it's because The Science of Racism was the outpouring of many difficult and frustrating conversations that I'd been having for over a decade. To explain, I'm a social psychologist. I have a doctorate in social psychology from Oxford University. I've published about 75 papers. And that means my day job is to run experiments to understand how people interact with each other and how those interactions are affected by different things. And despite this, I find myself repeatedly having the same conversation with people. People would say to me things like, "Oh, you can't possibly know if racism is still happening. You can suspect, but how could you possibly know? It's so complex, it's so difficult, there's so many different moving parts, so many different variables. How could you possibly be able to say if racism is part of the reason why this person was or wasn't hired for a job, if racism is part of the reason why this person is or isn't promoted, if racism is part of the reason why people are having these interactions with police or those interactions with in stores or these interactions with doctors? You can't know that." And I would be so frustrated because you can know that. And I did know that. And there's a whole discipline dedicated to knowing that. There's a whole discipline that has known for decades what happens when two people are identical, but one of them's white and one of them's black, and they apply for the same job. There's a whole discipline that's been able to measure literally in years how much experience your skin color costs you when you apply for this specific post. A whole discipline that has been able to measure specifically for years exactly how much it costs you in terms of money, like literal pounds and pence, how much it costs you to sell one item with dark skin and the same item with light skin. Not only do we know it, we have known it for an incredibly long time, and we can explain how we know it. And that is the frustration that I felt when I'd hear these people, sometimes really good people, members of my own family, my friends, intelligent people, highly educated people. They display a staggering lack of knowledge of some of the basics of what social psychologists do and what we understand. And I kept having these conversations. I'd explain it to one person, I'd explain it to another person, I'd walk them through the experiments, and I'd see the light in their eyes, and they'd say, "Oh, I do understand. I do see how we can know it, and I see how we could know even more than that." And after a while, I got really tired of having the same conversation with this person and with that person and with this person. And I thought, let's have it one last time for keeps. Let's have it with everybody. Let's write it down. And that's where The Science of Racism came from. I wrote it down. And because I'd had it in my head and in my heart, and I just kind of vomited it up on the page, it didn't take me that long to do. And I think that really comes out in how the book is written. It's a book about data, it's a book about science, about experiments, about numbers, but it's a book about this deep-seated frustration with the conversation we have about race in contemporary society. I think it's fine to talk about whether this hurts your feelings or whether this offends you, but I think it's not enough to have those conversations without starting from the knowledge of what we know is happening, what we know is true, what we can measure. I think that part is often left out and yet so essential. And I know I'm not the only person who feels like this. I have watched television programs where people argue about whether racism exists or whether this is important or that is important. I know I've spoken to other people who say, "I think racism is happening, but I don't know how to explain it to people." And so if you've also been having conversations like these, or if you feel some of my frustration, if you would like to put an end to this part of the conversation, this is a book for you. And I don't mean put an end to the whole conversation. I think there's a lot more to be said. I think we have to talk about how we understand racism, how we deal with racism, how we respond to it. But if you, like me, are done having that part of the conversation, the "does racism exist" conversation, the "how much of it is there" conversation, if you want to be done with that, if you want to be able to move on to new things, then I think you'd like The Science of Racism. I enjoyed writing it, and I hope you enjoy reading it.